Bitcoin, as you know, has been over 100,000 before. And so I think it's a little bit different this time. What we're seeing today, there's a lot of macro tailwinds behind Bitcoin.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We are here with Bradley Duke, head of Europe of Bitwise. Brad, I'm very excited to welcome you here to my podcast studio here in Lisbon.
I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
The first thing I would like to ask you is, I see this incredible, pin on your jacket, which is a familiar, actually, bee. So you are not a Bitcoin maxi, right?
Look, I try to avoid any labels, but I'm passionate about Bitcoin. I'm passionate about what its transformational power that it has. It's not just a great investment. There's other qualities that it has, and I think it's a really one of the most important and exciting innovations that has happened in the last. In the last 25 years. And I think it's, or maybe, I think even larger than that, maybe in the history of money. This is a game changer. And I don't say that lightly. I've thought a lot about it and I've read a lot about it, and it's an incredible innovation, and it is beginning to change the world.
I totally agree. Maybe before we get there, I know a bit about yourself, but I think it could be interesting to give an opener about where you were born, what has been your initial of how did you start your career, and how did you get finally in Bitwise?
Yeah, so I was born in South Africa. I was born on the east coast of South Africa, in a city called Durban. My undergraduate degree was at the University of Cape Town, so spent many years in Cape Town as well. And then I left South Africa, and my first job was actually in Brussels, in Belgium. I was an analyst. That was my very, very first job that I did. I studied economics as well as English literature as well
Nice.
as my undergraduate. And then later on I did an MBA. I've started working in finance proper in New York City. I moved over there. I got a job on Wall Street at a brokerage that was immediately acquired by Jefferies. Mm-hmm. And then for the next 8 years, I worked at Jefferies. I worked for Jefferies in New York City, and then in Paris, and then in London. So I stayed with Jefferies all this time, and I helped and grew a very nice business there. And I was always in the technology side of the business. So really the nascent technology, that's always been the area that's interested me. So it was firstly the early days of electronic trading, fixed protocol, and then algorithmic trading as that grew. So that was really, so my background is traditional finance, and then there was a pivot at a certain point in my career.
And that's the interesting part I would like to start, because when we met, I immediately Bitwise, it's a big firm, and then I learned there has been an acquisition,
right?
And so there has been this entrepreneurial, I would say, parentheses. And how did you, I can imagine you from South Africa, New York, Paris, big, Wall Street corporates. How did you start entrepreneurially, etc.? And then if you can tell a bit about the story behind it, and how finally, it became part of this larger group Bitwise.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was working at a sort of a boutique investment bank. I was co-CEO of this bank, and one of our clients, who was a quantitative trader, mm-hmm. Mathematician, came to speak to me one day, and he said, "I heard that you're the crypto guy." So, and this was like, I think 2017, 2018 was around then, and I said, "Well, look, I'm certainly interested in crypto. I've been following, Bitcoin and the changes that were happening in the crypto world." And he said, "Look, I've got this idea," and it was actually, his idea. For a Delta One Bitcoin tracker, but to do it better than the products that were available at the time. There was a product, there was the Grayscale Trust product in the US, which was famously had a lot of problems, and it's no one's fault that it had problems. It was the structure that they did an amazing thing getting a product to market in such a difficult environment in the US, and they were very limited about what they could do. So they got that product to market, and then in Sweden there was another product, the XBT Provider product that was there. Also not an ideal, structurally a problematic product as well. Synthetic replication, ETP. And on quite a fairly liquid market at the time. And so we came up with this together. We honed the idea of creating a Bitcoin ETPs so that investors could get exposure to price movements in the price movements of Bitcoin through a regulated product traded on a liquid regulated exchange, a major European exchange, and then with a lot of investor protections. We always had this mindset that whatever we built, one day the institutional investors would come in. And we wanted to be sure that when they did come in with their laundry list of due diligence questions, that we would be able to pass all those questions with flying colors. And that's always been the ethos on every decision we've made on the product, who the partners are, who's the custodian. And so that's really the birth of a company called ETC Group. The company, after a lot of planning, we started the company in 2019, and it took a long time to get approval, in Germany. And we eventually got approval for the first centrally cleared Bitcoin ETP anywhere in the world. Or this was on Xetra, on Deutsche Börse. This was the product ticker was BTCE, and that happened in June the 18th, 2020. So it's actually very soon. It's going to be the fifth anniversary of that product, and that product grew really quickly. We caught the timing is obviously very important in investment world, as you well know, and we were lucky with timing in terms of we got the right product at the right time. It grew very well. Then fast forward 4 years later, we were acquired by Bitwise. ETC Group was acquired by Bitwise. The ETC Group brand has now disappeared. We are only, Bitwise. We're Bitwise in Europe. It's been an amazing acquisition. Bitwise is such a good company. They were doing what we were doing and more in the US, in parallel. And now, they also have very similar culture, very similar values to the ETC Group, and also the way that they see themselves, in accompanying investors on this difficult journey, because crypto is a nascent asset class, and it's complex, and a lot of people don't understand it and worry about it, and so you have to be there as to accompany people on their investment journey. And we always had a very similar philosophy, so it was an easy marriage, let's say. When Bitwise acquired ETC Group, we gelled instantly, and that's and it's been great. I'm super proud to be there and to head the European operation. Some fantastic people, and it's a wonderful place to work as well.
That's amazing to hear, and I have so many questions. The first one is, I think you are one of the best persons to, provide an opinion about this very ancient dilemma, because when it comes to Bitcoin and crypto in general, but specifically Bitcoin, which is something different in the end, there have been over the years different theses, self-custody only, and then different tools or viable methodologies. And in one way, you anticipated, the current times. So my question for you is, how did things change in the last 5-6 years in terms of perception of ETPs, ETFs on Bitcoin? Are they, a good way for holding Bitcoin? There could be room for improvement. How the perception of the market changed about this tool? Because as I remember, initially there was a lot of, excitement, but also skepticism, and now I see completely the opposite, right?
I think that's a really good question. When we started out, there was especially from the Bitcoin community, there was a lot of people who are these purists. This is something they really protective, and it's a good thing that they're protective over Bitcoin and its direction. But they were against this idea. The whole thing was, this was a monetary system that was independent of traditional finance, and now we were kind of pulling it back in again. But I think over time, this perception has shifted, because people have realized, and Bitcoiners themselves have realized, that this is just another channel. This is another path for people, because ultimately it's about Bitcoin adoption. Not everybody wants to be their own bank. In the same way, not everybody who's wants to carry sort of gold coins in their pocket and walk down the street, and they want it to be stored somewhere and securely by experts and in safety. The ETF is, or for certain conditions and cases, it's an important wrapper around Bitcoin, because it allows for a number of things to happen. The one is, you don't have to be your own bank. You don't have to worry about or know about cold storage, buying Bitcoin on under-regulated exchanges. I mean, this is changing over time with Coinbase and these larger Kraken and these larger, very, very professional exchanges. But in the early days, there was, buying Bitcoin was tricky because these exchanges were completely unregulated. And also then once you had bought it, then you're like, how do I store it? And people get super stressed. Will I forget my password? Will somebody find my seed words and, take all my Bitcoin? And it doesn't sit easily with a lot of people, this idea of actually the responsibility. So with an ETP, it's just you get the exposure to Bitcoin, and it is ultimately direct exposure because you do have, and certainly in a lot of the products like the Bitwise physical products in Europe, you do have the ability to get physical delivery of Bitcoin if you want it. So if you say, yeah, I've got the shares, I want the Bitcoin at some point, you can. And so ultimately it is a direct ownership. But what it means is that you can go to your broker, buy, like you're buying shares of, Tesla or whatever else you hold in your portfolio. You can see it's there, and then you sell it when you want to sell it. If you want to sell it, I would advise people to consider holding, and then you don't have to worry about it. It takes the stress away from it, and it's on the people who really are the experts and do this day in and day out to manage the custody and to make sure that this is done well. And we find that even some people who are Bitcoin enthusiasts still buy the ETPs as well as have their own. And why? And that's because it's useful for them for different reasons. Like, for example, if you have a self-directed pension fund, right? You can, certain countries have different names for this. And in the US, it's 401k. In the UK, they call it a SIP. You can actually make an allocation to one of these products, and then which you wouldn't be able to do directly to Bitcoin. And then there's a number of other applications why it's useful in this format as a regulated instrument rather than the native Bitcoin itself.
I found this evolution, by the way, very interesting, right? Because a few years ago, it was not guaranteed that this would have been, in the end, the outcome. There was eventually opposition. And my question for you, you started this so early in Germany, which famously, I would say, it's not the most light in terms of regulation country, right? Probably the opposite, right? There are many memes online. How was your experience?
So I've got the experience at the beginning was very difficult, but now I'm super grateful to BaFin and the German regulator for having such an open mind. They today, along with the FINMA, which is the Swiss regulator, are really leading the way in terms of being open-minded about a cryptocurrency, recognizing that this is the future, and actually just being practical about it and saying, how can we, provide a framework around this asset. So, we on the one hand protecting investors, but on the same time not, blocking the path because this is, people. There are other jurisdictions. People can, money is international. People can, will find a way. How can we embrace this? And also it is job creation as well. Because the crypto industry is growing fast. There's lots of areas that people from custody to prime brokerage to trading to exchanges, to ETFs and ETPs. There's a lot of it's a big employer, and it makes sense that a country should embrace this. So getting back to your question though, Germany. When we were there, I mean, we used White & Case as our lawyers for the prospectus. I think we got up to 15 iterations of the prospectus before we got approved. And they said to us, in the history of their company, this is a record. So we were persistent. We went back. I had to ask myself some real questions while we were waiting for the approval. Have I made the right decision? Have I been blinded by sort of my passion for Bitcoin to choose this path for, starting this company? And in the end, it was the right decision. Yeah.
Probably a random question, but when I can imagine your trajectory, your team. You have a fantastic team. I met a few team members of extraordinary, relentless, and I think you put a lot of energy to get this done. And how did you feel when the overall value surpassed 1 billion in terms of AUM?
It was. I remember the day when it happened. I was actually in Switzerland, and I was in a Uber going to the airport,
Okay.
and the ops called me and they said we're over 1 billion. We were getting towards it, so I knew it was going to come, but then it was just like this surreal moment, like because it was less than a year after we launched the product, and I had not in my wildest dreams imagined that this product could grow as quickly as it did. But somehow, with the structure that we chose, the fact that it was a German ISIN, a DE ISIN, which is important to investors, especially in that region, and then just the timing of the market, which we didn't, we can't take any credit for. It was just a good timing, and it grew. So really, it was a surreal moment, and it was. I had this feeling of, I was of course proud of the team for what we had done, because we were a very small team as well. But just this almost like this disbelief, like I needed to pinch myself that this was surreal, So yeah,
that's great to hear, and I mean, I don't know if you can share, because this, in my view, this is a great success story. It's a success story for the industry as a whole, but specifically, eventually, it's also a success story from a European perspective, I would say. And I met some people of your team, and we were remain impressed at Citizenship on our fund, because we started immediately, talking of very detailed aspects of the product, and we really immediately saw an incredible level of preparation, and it's not so common to find it. So my kind of question is, do you share usually the team size and in relation to the milestones you achieve, or no?
The how big the team is? Bitwise worldwide
at that time when you on ETC.
Oh, at the beginning.
Yeah.
No, the team size was tiny.
Because it's a startup story.
It's a startup story, and we were bootstrapped. We had these investors that that wanted us to crawl before we walk, before we run. And it wasn't that VC model where they were just like build a team, make it happen. If we build it, they will come. We were much more cautious about that. So, really at the time, I think when we listed, there wasn't more than the 5 people in the company when we started, and then we grew over time. We had to backfill quite quickly. It was hard to grow as fast as we were, and then to start, because we outsourced finance, and then we had to get a CFO in. We outsourced sales a lot to partner firms who had distribution across Europe, and then we had to insource that over time, because in the end the sales team needed to be experts. They couldn't be generalists, and so that was something attention we needed to get the product out there. But we also needed people to really know how to sell, to tell the story and to help people, because if you don't, you always get shown up straight away. If somebody asks you one question and the salesperson, well, I don't know, let me, then they lose trust, and so it was actually quite a challenging time, especially, in 2021, 2022, because we were growing pains and we were transitioning from being this startup to being a real company, and it was quite challenging at the time.
But that's a fantastic story, and that's why I asked you. I took this freedom because, in my view, it's a great success story, and of course, also testament to how much it's important sometimes to be to stick with ideas and fight in the bad moments. And in my view, it's great to imagine from a Germany perspective and a German perspective, a startup of 5 team members, eventually going for 1 billion AUM in an area which objectively is complex, even for large institutions, because 15 reviews for the prospectus with the authority, it's something that would make probably in the largest institutions worldwide a bit scared, right? So this is incredible. It's
thank you.
And that was the reason why I got impressed by the story, and the reason why I asked, okay, Brett, jump on the podcast, because it's a startup story, even if you didn't start as a pure startupper in San Francisco doing pure startups, right? But this was incredible, and this leads me to a broader question, which is you were anticipating the why behind Bitcoin, and I think you have a unique angle on this. So if you have to explain to my mom, essentially, and or to someone in his 50, maybe a real estate guy who is not really into tech in general, why Bitcoin?
So it's an interesting thing that you said there, how to explain to your mom, because actually I had to explain to my own parents, and actually to specifically to my wife's father, who was completely single-minded about wanting to know about Bitcoin. He had caught his attention. He didn't know much about it. And then it was a very interesting exercise because this was actually happened just before we launched. And then once I'd spoken to him, he said, "Okay, can you help me buy Bitcoin as well?" And those two things, talking to him and the helping him buy, really reinforced that we were on the right path. Because one, when people see the opportunity and what's going on, and it captures them, we call it getting orange pilled. Yeah, then they become very, very passionate about it. And the second thing is walking him through. This is my father-in-law, how to buy Bitcoin. Was very, very challenging, because we were doing it like he was holding it on a cold storage, and so getting him through that whole process, and then recognizing the alternative is to buy, through his brokerage account, his online broker, instantly. There was it just really, I just thought we're on the right track here. But so getting back to your question, so Bitcoin. It is technology, and there's no getting away from that. But really what it is it's a new money that is the best money that we've ever created as humans on this planet. And why is that? There's a couple of reasons. So the first reason is it's the hardest currency that's ever existed. We famously, there's 21 million. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. I think at the moment there's like 19.7 or 19.8 million Bitcoin that is already in circulation, and there will never be more. So that means it's a hard currency. So it's harder. It's scarcer than gold. Gold, we can always pull more out the ground. You can get new technology to find it, to dig it up. Bitcoin, you can't. So it's rare, and it's scarce, and it's secure. This is important. It's secure because of incredible technology, which uses. That's why the word cryptocurrency comes from. It uses cryptography as a way of securing the value and the transactions, and making sure that they're intact and secure. And it's a currency that exists wherever the internet exists. So anybody with a phone, with a computer at home, and access to the internet can get Bitcoin and also buy, send and receive Bitcoin, trade or buy things or sell things or whatever. They can transact on the Bitcoin network. And the next most important thing about Bitcoin, and this is especially important in the times that we're living in today, is that it is not attached to any country. It is completely neutral. And this is, the history of money, it's always been about a sovereign state behind it. There's going to be there was a reason why there was a picture of Napoleon on the coin, or whoever was the leader, the King George or whoever, because this was the currency of a nation state, and Bitcoin has got no nation state. It's not associated with any companies even, and not even any people, right? So the Satoshi Nakamoto famously is anonymous, and I think it's great. I think people shouldn't try and find out or speculate about who he was or who they were, because it could be a group of people. Because actually there's more power in people not knowing. It doesn't matter, even if they do find him, it doesn't change much. But I like the idea of just, this is part of the beauty of Bitcoin. And then so we talk a lot about Bitcoin in the world of finance as an investment and an investment possibility, and people are interested, it's at this price, and how much more is it going to go up? And so they look at it in terms of an investment that they can hold and get a return or add it to a portfolio, and then there's being some outperformance in their portfolio, because there's it's introducing it. The Sharpe ratio goes up. The drawdowns actually don't go down much, which is kind of a magical situation where if you get it at the right percentage. But so we look at it as an investment asset. But people who living in a country where they're underbanked, or with a broken banking system, or a failed state, or hyperinflation, or just even high inflation, Turkey, Argentina, then Venezuela where there is actually hyperinflation. They are able to trade with the rest of the world with a currency that's, relatively speaking, incredibly stable. It's a store of value for them and also a medium of exchange, and also for people who are really, are migrant workers. So somebody who's gone to work in Dubai and sending money to the Philippines, or to India or wherever it is. Historically they'd have to go through Western Union or and pay 8%, wait a few days, and there was there's a lot of process around this and very expensive. And they were basically, their small earnings was getting taxed heavily effectively by these companies to move to do a very simple transaction. They can now use cryptocurrency, including Bitcoin, to do that for pennies. Yeah.
100%. I always use the analogy of email versus traditional postal service,
right?
And that's why you send today dozens of emails, and instead, once upon a time it was different. I'm reading now the biography of from Isaacson about Benjamin Franklin.
Oh yeah.
There was this whole concept of sending letters, and it was a different social experience because the medium was more than 100 times less efficient.
Yeah.
And same story on Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can ask you, you especially now at Bitwise, there is a fantastic, and very robust research activity behind this asset.
Yeah.
How do you see Bitcoin evolving in the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, so it's a fascinating time. And it's interesting because, being somebody who's, kind of lived and breathed Bitcoin for quite a few years now, there's things that we're seeing now that we actually didn't anticipate. Some things we did anticipate, and we were thinking one day this will happen, and it happened. And then there were other things that we didn't even imagine would happen, and they've happened. So I think right now, what's the most interesting stories for me in Bitcoin today, of course, we're moving from it being a retail phenomenon to, it's moving up the value chain to the, larger private banks, wealth management, family offices, hedge funds, and all other kinds of investment funds and asset managers, and to, to the true institutional investors. And this is a process that's happening now. It's happening at the moment. Some will be quicker, some will be slower, depending on what kind of shop they are. A traditional pension fund is a slow-moving beast, and it's supposed to be. So they will take longer to get involved, but everyone's looking and interested and getting educated. So it's an exciting time. But so that phenomenon we always expected. And as I mentioned to you earlier, when we were planning the company, we thought this will come one day, and this is what we need to do. The thing that I didn't see coming, and I don't think many people did, was the corporate adoption of Bitcoin. And this has become like this huge game changer. And so, our research department, you mentioned them, they looking at all sorts of things. They're looking at a lot of macro things. What are the tailwinds and headwinds to Bitcoin adoption and the price? And we've seen that this year, the number of the corporations, and this is now only the corporations who are listed and have to declare their holdings, they've already consumed twice the Bitcoin supply for 2025, more than twice the supply. Them alone they've bought that up. So when you start to think about that in terms of fixed supply, you don't have to be an economist to know that Bitcoin is a fixed supply, and then you've got this really sort of parabolic, growth in demand. It can only mean one thing: over time. I don't know the timing thereof. When will it really pop and go crazy? I don't know, but you're seeing this demand. So now more and more of these corporations are either adopting this Bitcoin standard, where they amassing as much Bitcoin as they can as part of their own treasury function. Some companies have abandoned their entire other business, like Strategy did, and just focusing on Bitcoin. But then for every company that's listed, and we know that today in the US, 80 American companies, listed companies, actually hold Bitcoin as a treasury asset, that there are hundreds of others that we don't know about, we've never heard of, that may just be a small shop, doing whatever, where they've kind of thinking, well, instead of holding US Treasuries, which are looking a little bit wobbly at the moment, maybe I should allocate a bit of a percentage, and are using Bitcoin as a treasury asset. So that's something that's really, it's growing. And then every day you're reading more and more about it. Recently, Microsoft, they decided, I think it was a mistake, but they decided not to buy Bitcoin as a treasury asset, but they voted on it. So there are large corporations that are looking. I think Tesla as a car company, they hold a lot of Bitcoin, and then there's as I mentioned, 80. That's just in the US. In Europe, we have Blockchain Group in France, which has now come out following a similar model to Strategy and MetaPlanet in Japan. So this is something that's really starting to grow. In addition to retail and institutional demand, and in addition to sovereign demand, we've got these in the US. They came out and said that they are going to have this Bitcoin reserve, and not only at a federal level, but also at a state level. We've had 2 states, I think, in the last week that have come out and said, have launched approved their Bitcoin reserve at a state level.
Bitcoin is back over $100,000 or 0.1 million only, I would say. What are the forces behind these dynamic in your view, Brad?
So, look, Bitcoin, as you know, has been over 100,000 before, and so I think it's a little bit different this time. What we're seeing today, there's a lot of macro tailwinds behind Bitcoin, and for example, I'll get we've all seen the U.S. trade policy tariffs that have been brought out around the world. These have really started to shift. There's been a shift in the geopolitical leanings of the world, and a shift in the structures that have been there in place for really decades as a result. And it's the thing I think these tailwinds actually affect the price of Bitcoin and quite strongly. So the number one reason is we've seen, and our research team has seen again and again, that expectations of inflation pushes the price of Bitcoin. If people expect inflation to rise, then the price of Bitcoin usually is pushed up. And there are expectations of inflation now, because with tariffs, by definition, usually brings some stagnation, but it also brings inflation, because all the goods that people are consuming and trading globally become more expensive. So that's one of the tailwinds. Probably a bigger tailwind, though, is the weak dollar. So the dollar is starting to fall. There is this feeling, this global movement, this de-dollarization, which is starting to accelerate. And then we ask ourselves, why does this de-dollarization happening? And the thing is it's part of, historically, people have, countries like China have bought U.S. treasuries.
Yes.
They've been one of the biggest buyers globally of U.S. treasuries. Effectively, they are lending the U.S. money. This is a debt instrument that is issued by the U.S. And then the U.S. is required to pay it back with interest. They pay interest on the holdings, right? This is treasuries are debt instruments. But at a certain point, if there's an adversarial relationship, a country may not feel that they want to continue to hold as part of their treasury assets US dollars. And I think this is a movement that's happening now, where we're seeing the historic holdings of US treasuries falling especially by foreign holders. And at the same time, you've seen people. So where do they move into? They move into gold, traditional safe haven asset. Gold, as you know, has been reaching all-time highs lately. And now they have an alternative. They can also move into Bitcoin as well. So our research team will tell you that there's a strong inverse correlation between the price, the dollar, and the price of Bitcoin. So when the dollar falls, Bitcoin goes up. And this is and then in addition to that, we have this new paradigm where people are now increasingly, or investors are seeing Bitcoin as an important alternative to gold as a safe haven asset. And so that's happening. And then The third thing, and this is actually quite tied to the dollar, the falling dollar, and that is there's been unprecedented increase in global money supply. So M2, is on its way back up. What we do is we have a chart that tracks the price of Bitcoin and overlays the price of the M2, the money supply, lagged by 3 months.
Three months.
Because we lag it by 3 months because it takes time for the money that's coming into the system to filter through and start to affect, for its effects to be felt. And the curve is phenomenal.
I just posted yesterday on X.
Right. Yeah.
It's incredible. It's incredible.
It really is incredible. So those three tailwinds together, for me, are the reason why we're starting to see Bitcoin beginning to rally again now. As you mentioned, it's 0.1 of a million. And there's we've heard from a lot of very respected people from a lot of big financial institutions, traditional financial institutions, predicting very high numbers for Bitcoin over time. Of course, this isn't investment advice, and we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, but it's a very bullish case at the moment.
Can I ask you a follow-up question, which is super interesting, even for normal conversations with people not involved in Bitcoin or tech? Gold and Bitcoin, is there any correlation of sort?
So we look and we monitor correlation over time, because of course correlation isn't set in stone. It changes. It changes over time. If you're looking over the last year, there may be some correlation over the last 3 years, maybe lower or higher. And so this is something that we're looking at the whole time. And of course, in portfolio management theory, you're always looking to have diversified, uncorrelated assets to improve in performance and increase the diversification and the risk-adjusted return of the portfolio. And what we did find, what our research found, and I'm definitely have to nod in their direction because I didn't come up with this. They looked at the whether specifically, it's not exactly answering your question, but it's kind of in a roundabout way. They looked at whether they see gold as having a lower correlation to equities, and Bitcoin having a lower correlation to bonds. So together, gold and Bitcoin together in a portfolio, in a balanced portfolio, are good assets to help this diversification of risk. And look, this is changing over time, and that's why I wanted to say, because we saw recently there was a decoupling. Usually Bitcoin stocks go down, Bitcoin goes down, and we saw recently stocks went down and Bitcoin didn't go down. And this is so, and everyone was saying this decoupling is happening. It may not be permanent, but it's definitely happening, that people are not seeing Bitcoin as a risk asset in the same way they do equities.
I don't know if this is something maybe that picked up your interest so far, but what are your thoughts about, more recently there has been an increase of projects building Bitcoin DeFi stuff, Bitcoin DeFi. And at least among institutions, everyone I spoke with, family offices, institutions, they're all looking into yield or forms of, again, Bitcoin DeFi. Yeah. What are your thoughts about this topic, if any, or?
Yeah, no, this is something I think about a lot, and we also look at it in terms of product, because it's quite difficult to read the market and where it's at. Like, what you can't just think up a great product and put it out there and then just wait and hope people will buy it, right? There has to be demand. You have to get feedback from the market that this is something that people are wanting and interested in. Of course, yield is something that people are chasing all the time in different products, and Bitcoin, unlike Ethereum and other layer ones where there's staking and proof of stake blockchains where you can earn rewards just by helping to secure the network. In Bitcoin, it doesn't happen. It's a proof of work blockchain. A lot of people argue that's actually a purer form of blockchain, the proof of work, but it's not a debate we need to have today. But you're right. They've started to use to develop the ability to stake Bitcoin even. So you use the Bitcoin to stake on other proof of stake blockchains and earn the rewards back, and then also use your Bitcoin lend it, and for different DeFi, decentralized finance applications, and to earn additional yield. And this is something that's growing. I think for me, I think it's an interesting space. I think it's also important for anybody to always understand their risk. Yeah, what is it, by adding this in, how much, because if you don't understand your risk, then you can't really calibrate what's the right return. Okay, and that's for me the risk and return it's carved in stone. It's not something you can tweak or bend. It's there. If you're getting a high return, there must be a high risk somewhere, and it's just sometimes the people not understanding it or getting into. But look, I'm supportive of all the innovation. I'm not one of these people who's like, don't touch Bitcoin. It's perfect the way it is, because while I do believe that it is perfect the way it is, people must do what they need to do, and we can't stop the world from innovating, and we shouldn't want to. So,
and moving probably in the second and last part of this interview.
Yeah.
As you know, I'm writing abundantly about global mobility, global living, and everything in between. So I'm just curious from your perspective, because I don't know so many South Africans. I just recently met one guy in Dubai who actually decides to spend half of the year in Cape Town. He loves Cape Town, but I've never been, to be honest.
Right.
So the question for you is, why Lisbon after New York, Paris, also for family, for business?
So I think it's a number of reasons. Firstly, I love Lisbon. It's a great city, and there's good people. I like this part of the world, the Iberian Peninsula. But yeah, look, I've as I mentioned earlier, I'd lived in New York and Paris and London. These are large cosmopolitan cities, but I like Lisbon because I actually grew up in Durban on the coast by the ocean. I was a surfer. I still am a surfer, and Lisbon is a capital city, a city with culture, and it's on a river, but it's 10 kilometers away from the ocean, and there is that lifestyle, that there's the beaches and nature, which is something that is very, very important to me. We've got there's mountains of Sintra, you've got forests, you've got beaches, you've got there's a lot going on if you like sport on the water, not even surfing, but sailing and kite surfing and all the it's a place that's got all of that. You eat very well, and importantly, it's actually really excellent for crypto networking as well.
It's true.
Yeah, so and there's a lot of people have it's attracted people from around the world. But it's a wonderful place. I'm very happy I moved here, and so that's in a nutshell. That's why it's a quality of life story, sunshine as well. I'd lived in the north, the darker parts of Europe for a lot of my career, which is wonderful. And London's a great city, and love Paris. But this is for me for now in this phase of my life. I love being here. So
that's great. Brett, thank you so much for being with me today.
Yeah.
This was a fantastic overview of all these topics, and I look forward to invite you again in a few months for updates and see how some things develop. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah,
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.